I think my mic is, perfect. Welcome everyone. I believe that we're going to start, so I'll stand. Oops. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk together about the future of development, but one of the best ways to do that is actually to do it through a case study. So we're going to introduce you to a project that is very dear to my heart, a project that we've been working on together for the last 2 years on the future of women's role in society in Sierra Leone. So this project was actually funded by the IDRC, the International Development Research Center in Canada, and was fully implemented by a team of about 10 researchers based at the University of Makeni in Sierra Leone. So I'm very happy to be here together with Admire on my left and Ibrahim on my very far left. I'll give them just a minute to introduce themselves just in a bit, but just to give you a little bit of a context around like the future of women's role in society, I could tell you that it was a project that was run around like 6 futures literacy labs, so action research processes in futures, run in 3 locations in Sierra Leone, so in Freetown, the capital city, in Makeni, which is a mid-sized city in Sierra Leone, and in Dankewali, which is at the village level in Sierra Leone. But it won't tell you much about the assumptions that we had or the hypothesis that we had behind the project and why that resonates well with a project on the future of development. The reason why we label the project the future of women's role in society, you might wonder, what is the future of women's role in society? And that was the whole point. It was a rather vague title if you think about it, based on, I would say, 3 intuitions that we had. The first intuition was to say that if we want to do anything that is related to development, starting by listening to women could be a good entry point for that. We've just discussed it a second ago. The point is, if you want to actually have an interesting sample, you're going to start with a large sample of individuals, a majority, that would be the case of women. But the particularity of women is that we're talking about communities that understand what oppression and marginalization has been about. So if you want to talk about what it means to be part of society, asking people who've been used to forms of marginalization can be a way to get that conversation going. So that was our first intuition. Doing a development research project should start with women at the center of the approach. That was the first intuition. The second intuition that we had is that we didn't want to preempt the sense of direction of the project. We didn't know if it was about women in education, women in agriculture, or was it about employment. That we didn't know. And also because all of us as researchers, we have different research interests. So we were going to look into issues that were very different, one from the other. So we didn't want to preempt that right from the get-go by labeling the project or identifying a trajectory in particular for the project. The third type of intuition that we wanted to play with, and that's something that I actually want to talk to you about, is that if the entry point to those conversations is not a thematic orientation, so it's not about women in agriculture or women in education, the orientation or the value add of a futures approach was not about the theme in itself, but about proposing a methodology for people to enter in a conversation. So the third intuition that we played with was actually to say, there's something about futures that allow us to tap into the narrative frames of populations. And that's where we started the project. Now, the 3 of us here will actually present some of the findings that we had, and so I do want to give the opportunity to my teammates here to also introduce themselves. And so, Admire, please, over to you.
Thank you, Eva. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Admire Moiwo, a research assistant at the Feukeu Literacy Center, UNESCO Chair, University of Makeni, and I have a keen interest in the future of women
You need to lift up your voice. In the mic. I think your mic might not be fully on. Go ahead. Keep on going.
Are you getting me now?
Not yet, but you keep on.
Are you getting me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I was saying my name is Admire Moiwo, a research assistant at the Future Literacy Center, UNESCO Chair, University of Makeni, and I have a keen interest in the future of women in agriculture. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And of course, part of the research assistant, it is unfortunate but very positive that as a man, I'm here to talk about women, which is quite much interesting. So I am Ibrahim Conteh, research assistant, again, as you've heard from the UNIMAC UNESCO Futures List project, which is an action research actually taken to explore the diversity of women's future, which is key. My interest will be two talking points on the themes. One, intergenerational concerns that were shared by women in the room and how that matters as an alternative source of development and empowerment for women. My second point would be looking at elitist policy agenda that comes in conflict with the current reality as revealed by the research that was revealed through triggering or exploring about the images, feelings, expression we may owe as to what development is. Stay tuned as I'll be talking details on these 2 points, and I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I would actually add on that just before we get into some of the findings coming from the project and what that was relevant for gender policies in Sierra Leone. I should add 3 additional information. One is the fact that this project was also supported by the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs of Sierra Leone, who's been very much of an advocate of futures literacy. And so that was one of the elements that came as part of this project, meaning that the structure of the project was actually originally about 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. 6 months of training Sierra Leonean futurists so that they could actually adopt different futures methodologies and readapt them to context, but also as a way for us to pull context in terms of understanding what is the storytelling narratives in Sierra Leone, how does gender work and the type of dynamics in those different locations. I told you in Dankawali, village level, Makeni, 5th largest city in Sierra Leone, and in Freetown, the capital city of Sierra Leone. Then a second phase that was specifically in terms of implementing futures literacy labs, so directly those activities with different participants, mainly women, in those different locations. So we organized 6 of them in 3 different locations. And then 6 months spent analyzing some of the data, but also finding ways to create that dialogue with the ministry. So that was originally the structure. Things change around because that's the point of projects, right? So things always change. But that being said, what we're currently going to present is some of the findings that were interesting for us, because one thing that became very clear with this project is that whatever we expected for women to share with us in terms of their aspirations for the future and the ideas of what their role was, whatever we assumed that to be was very different from what we got to hear once we actually had the platform to listen to them. So Ibrahim, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned earlier on, I shall be talking on 2 points. So I'm starting with point 1, which is the intergenerational concerns expressed by women as an alternative source of empowerment and development for them. But I'll start that with a question. What would be the source of empowerment or development for women? What comes to our mind if we think of development for women? What would you suggest or propose?
I don't know if we have a mic running around, but in any case, if we do not, we have one coming, so that gives you the chance to think about it. What's usually, if we were a future literacy lab, we start by asking probable or desirable futures of a particular topic. So if it was on probable futures of women's power, what would be your expectations of answers? What would your answer to that question? Probable futures of women's power. And the mic is coming our way. Oh, the mic is here. Do we have any ideas?
We have somebody else.
Probably an obvious one is to be in positions of power.
To be in position
To have
of power.
access to the positions of power. Right?
But define what power is in that particular sequence?
Well, from my very Western perspective, I would have thought, to be in government, to be in business and in positions of power in business. That's where I would honor from a very Western perspective. That's where I'd be coming from.
Thanks for that, Martin. I think Safa wants to go ahead, please.
Yes. I think also the possibility for women to work on their schedule. So, because women have different needs, so which are the different cycle, which lasts 1 month instead of 24 hours like for men. And so taking into account these kind of characteristics and giving them the possibility to work, even, to have the same, to reach the same level of power and empowerment as men, considering that, not forcing them to be on medication or be less of, arrive to some kind of accomplishments, but while losing their health. So I think this taking into account the nature of women.
All right. And of course, we've heard from different participants in the room giving different answers, which is good. But that would be a stepping point, a takeoff point to see the need of the data we have and how it comes in conflict with general perspective and notion of empowerment needed by women. It is of course true in another context that women need financial empowerment and of course political space, as he mentioned, and of course empowerment in another form as she made mention of. But it is interesting that the future literacy project implemented through action research actually bring different images about what empowerment means for women. That is intergenerational concern, which I don't get from the room, which is youth empowerment leads to women's empowerment. Somebody would ask a question, why does that matter? It matters because Sierra Leone, as a West African country, believe in a communal living where generations can feel fulfilled and achieve development through another generation. Children are seen as source of wealth for their parent, and this parent, remember, there is a mother and a father, and the mother play the woman role. True or false? Good. So I'm saying, my ending point is, if that is so, women in the room shared with us that empowerment for them meant when youth are empowered, they feel empowered. Because if youth are secured, if they are not on drugs, if they are not causing thievery in the society, like theft, rape, they feel a sense of empowerment and safety, which has a very relevant to policy. It serves as a good implication to policy. So what is new is development has been seen as a one-sided approach of treating women in isolation. But rather, women in the room are now sharing with us that their development is hinged on empowering youth, which is very much in place according to what they share. This we were able to achieve because we used the future literacy approach that allows us to trigger questions, but not to influence what participant, like female participant, we are going to share. So it gives us and broaden our understanding as to different sources of development that women require. So for sustainable development, of course, whatever we talk about the future is also about development. We believe that development should come from the people themselves. Development should not take a blueprint model, the top bottom, but rather from the bottom top. So this action research actually unveils some of the truth. Thank you. I shall be coming on to talk more.
Thanks, Ibrahim, for that. There is a strong point that is coming from here. As we get to hear, whenever we talk about women's empowerment, one of the bias that is coming very strongly in policy, and that was identifying the work that we're doing, is that we're usually encouraging individual trajectories. So it's about encouraging a single in the sense of individual women to get into education or to get into a business opportunity. And one of the images that was coming very strongly from what you're saying is actually, as we're asking all of those questions, they're talking about other people. And we're like, but what? Why are you talking about other people? We're talking about you. You're the women that we're asking that from. And so eventually we get to see, if you're talking about me, I'm not here in isolation. And so talking about developing from the perspective of thinking about a collective society is actually something that was coming very strongly. So thanks for sharing some of those ideas. What type of implication do you believe it has for policy? So if you're thinking about some of the work that we were trying to share this information back with the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs, how do you think it links back to the type of gaps that we see between those aspirations that we get to hear on the ground and the policies that are in place in Sierra Leone?
All right. I think the spotlight in that aspect has been national policies in our country over the years, and even existing gender policy just instituted by an act of parliament, made provision for women's empowerment by giving them political space and, of course, giving them education, paid little, no attention to intergenerational concern. So it matters for future policy development. So the Ministry of Gender, and of course, this data was also communicated at national level, I believe bringing all stakeholders in the room, and also sharing it globally with you in the room. And I believe we really see clearly that if all the policies could address the needs of all women, not in isolation, just education, no. Policy should come from them. Address the felt need of women by using the feature images. That was how we were able to identify the spotlight of how youth empowerment matters to women's empowerment, reflecting on the fact that young people serve as the backbone and a source of development for the aged, the women, and of course for society in entirety. So that is the policy implication. It is positive if policymakers could reflect on that and reshape or redesign policies that would address all women. We talk about inclusion, leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thanks for that. A point that was also coming strongly from the project around these gaps that we notice between the existing gender policy in Sierra Leone and some of the concerns that were coming on the table was also related to this issue of talking to aspirations that we did not necessarily see as being the dominant aspirations in some locations. So as mentioned before, we've run the project also at the village level, so in Dankawali, in the northeastern part of Sierra Leone. And so we're talking about more rural communities. And what we're seeing is that there was directly a narrative when it comes to going to school, which is that in order to get into power, formal power in government, you first need to have gone through schools at the highest level, especially higher education. And so this type of trajectory that actually requires not only for you to be in government, but there's already an entire life trajectory that is expected of you in order to get there. Now in situations for rural communities, especially women living in rural communities, where they don't necessarily have this type of pathways, the question is, does it mean that they will never be expected to be powerful? And so that was a question that we had for them. And so some of the work that you've been doing at Meyer actually speaks to that question in terms of finding ways to source empowerment from where people are at. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yes. Like Eva is saying rightly, there is this kind of a disconnect between the rural women, what the rural women think, in a way that what the policy states about the future of women in the Gender Act and what the rural women actually believes is quite different. Now, organizers may go to the rural areas to organize some kind of a program, and they will hand the rural woman a pen and a paper to write, which on the contrary, either almost all of them or very few of them actually can write. So which means plenty of the rural women in the village that we did our research could not read, neither can they write. So there is this disconnect between the act itself and the reality. So in that light, sitting with the women in the room, in a space where they feel comfortable, you will be able to know that if women should be given a space to empower themselves through the perspective that they already know, through a familiar perspective. So that is where the agriculture comes in. So if the tools and the skills that the women in the rural communities or society, if is what they know is agriculture, we should encourage them, or there should be policies or some kind of a paper written down to encourage them to be more empowered in what they already know, rather than bringing to them what they cannot do in reality. So you cannot give them a pen, encourage them to work hard in agriculture. That's what they know, that the skills, they live with these skills. These skills helps them to sustain themselves, to sustain their families, and to sustain their communities in which they live in. So, like Joseph was saying, there is the policy in paper, but the reality is a bit conflicting. There is a whole disconnection between the policy and the reality that is on the ground. When it comes to women that are lettered, I mean the educated women, and the women that are not actually educated. So in reality, we will say most of the policies that are written probably favors women that goes to school. So which means, what about the women that do not go to school? But actually they are contributing to communities in their own way, in their own space, in their own comfort zone. We are not opportune to go to school, go to colleges or not. But if you look at also the women that goes to school, can they do agriculture? They cannot. So that is where you have to diversify. There should be this diversification of skilled and unskilled, and also those who are educated and those who are not educated should be given an equal opportunity of empowerment without limiting either of which. I will be coming in as time goes on.
Thank you. I was just like literally listening to everything you were saying. I think one thing that is coming strongly from the project is the need, as you were saying, when you're talking about the diversification, difficult word, about the diversification of the sources of empowerment, we're also talking about the diversification of narratives of power. Right now, in the way we approach women's empowerment, there is a particular idea of what is power. And one thing that came very strongly from the project is that there's already different forms of power, but they're not necessarily labeled or perceived as being power. And unfortunately, that means that the way we do gender or women's empowerment tends to disempower some women because we don't see them as being powerful. And we're not necessarily encouraging them to see themselves as being powerful, contributing members of society. And so by shifting the narrative and starting from what they had to say, we got to realize, but that is pretty powerful, what you're doing. Like, you're feeding your family. Come on, that has to count for something. And you're actually feeding the entire neighborhood. That has to count for something. But they're like, but I'm not powerful because I don't necessarily have all of the tick-the-box type of approach. So that is something that came quite strongly in terms of being able to question some of the assumptions that we have around gender and power, around power in general and what matters to the communities that we live in. So that is one of the value add that we got to observe quite strongly from a futures practice. But another value add, maybe you can actually elaborate on that more, because that's something that you were very much interested in, was the opportunity to just use futures for people to have a conversation. And I think that's something that you alerted me to, because I was not seeing it that way, and that was the role of futures and taboos. So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit more, Maya.
Yes. I'm very passionate about taboos because let me just proudly tell you that I am so much more of a traditional woman. Yes, so I'm passionate about taboos. In our society, speaking from the context in which I am experienced or in which I am exposed to, there are certain things women cannot do. There are certain things women cannot own. There are certain illness that isolates women. And these are the things that actually I am interested in so much more, like I started. Let me start with agriculture. There are two things actually, there are a lot, but let me speak to two things. One, agriculture. Two, we have an illness that is called fistula. I will explain later what I mean, but let's start with agriculture. Now, it might surprise you to know that a woman in the rural area of my country, Sierra Leone, cannot own a land unless if she has a male figure behind her. As shocking or not as it may sound, this is some of the things, or this is one of the things that is disempowering women. In reality, women are the ones doing the entire work. In reality. But you see the men taking credit. This is not me taking sides, but I am just saying that if you want to empower the women, do not give half and half. Give the woman the power that she needs to prove herself. Do not limit her to having a man behind her before you think she's been empowered or she's been powerful. Because either way, she's still powerful. Because even the land that is given through the man to cultivate crops, the woman will get up in the morning with the kids, goes to the farm, do almost 85 to 90% of the job, and at the end, harvest, try to support the family, but still, the land must be owned by a man. So this is an issue that really needs to be addressed. And we got all of these things. On the surface, you won't hear it, because this is something that maybe has been made acceptable by society. But because the project itself created a space for women, for them to feel safe. One, we speak their languages, and just to let you know that in Sierra Leone we have a common language that we call Creole. So we speak, all of us speak that language. So because of that, they were able to be comfortable to talk about these issues that are not being talked about ordinarily. And also the issue about, there are health issues that are related with women. There are many, but let me just limit it to one, which is fistula. Of course, fistula is an illness that comes with early childbearing or early sex life or childbirth. That is, it disfigures you in a way. Some people might be very uncomfortable around you. You lose friends, you lose community members, and so, but because of this project, these are the things we are able to unearth. We created a space, and we are able to know that all of these things, one way or the other, can be disempowering to women. Because lots of women are not coming up because they think society might judge them, or they think the stigma might be too much for them to handle. So because of that, they will just decide to keep quiet and probably that will lead to an early death or something or whatever it is. But there are lots of issues that comes with empowerment that are not being looked at in our society. And that is why, let me just personally say this to you, Eva, that we are so grateful for this project because we were able to know these things. We might not be serious about them because we do not hear the women talking about them. We have not been creating that space. But because the IDRC and the UNESCO created that space, women were able to talk about it. Some of us were able to connect with it because we all have one or two experiences that somebody can say something and you automatically click and you are able to connect yourself to the situation.
Thanks for that. And once again, that was actually a joint project. So there's many things that are coming just from that. And actually, I'll start before summarizing some key points to open the floor also for ideas, questions, and observations on the project. I'll give you an anecdote that I think speaks to what Admire was just talking about just now. We've been running a Futures Literacy Lab, and I think actually this one was on the future of women's power. So we go through the 3 phases of the Futures Literacy Lab. We've been talking about probable futures, desirable futures of women's power. We talk about a reframed scenario where men are not there. In Sierra Leone, what happens? Menode type of scenario. And then we suddenly have a phase 3 where we go back to the present and we're asking ourselves, how do we look at the present now that we've been through different type of futures? And at some point, one of us, Jibril, asked participants in the room, who is the breadwinner of your families? And so in the room, we had women who were working for the administration of the university. Some of them were cooks, others were tailors. You had different women, but they all had an occupation and were getting money for themselves. And when we asked, who is the breadwinner of the family, they all replied, no exception, the only exception were those who didn't have a husband. They all replied, my husband. And then we asked the question again because we had been through the activity together, so we had a sense of what their roles was in their own families and their aspirations for themselves and their community. And we ask again, but who's the one buying, milk for the kids or making sure that there's actually food on the table in general or taking care of the clothes? And they say, well, I am. And we ask the question again, who is the breadwinner of the family? And they're like, my husband. And so it was really interesting for us to actually see that type of disconnect. The type of question that we get to ask to people will not necessarily get us in a place to hear everything that we have to say. Because, for example, this very idea of what a breadwinner is does not necessarily correspond to the same thing that what we get to see in the official narratives that usually is supported by gender policies at the global level. And so if we wanted to actually be able to support women in their own sense of power, we could tell them, well, here's the definition of a breadwinner. If you're the one who's actually feeding your family daily and giving them clothes, you're the breadwinner, but you're not actually addressing what they have in mind. And you also need to respect that. Maybe you want to change that because you belong to the community, you're a Sierra Leonean woman, and you believe this is not fair, and you want to act upon that. That's one way to do it. But for people who are actually interested in development research, we also have a role to play in terms of seeking understanding. And so the value of this project is that we did not necessarily have the obligation to come up with, new schools or build wells, but we had an obligation to seek understanding and make sure that we understand what do they mean when they say this particular word. And that is one of the valuable contribution of futures for this type of project. The ability to question assumptions, but also the opportunity for a conversation to be had and for us to have the opportunity to make sure that we understand one another in the room. So thank you both. We want to open the floor for questions and ideas. I know that we started late, so I think we have permission to actually have quite a bit of time for a Q&A session. And so I just want to open the floor, have your ideas, your observations, your questions. I'm very happy that we have a bigger team than this, but unfortunately, we can now have 13 of us here. So there's 2 of us, and I'm really grateful that they could make it here. So please address all of your questions to them directly, and we'll be very happy to reply. I don't know who was first. I think 15 minutes should be fine. 15. Please tell Mary directly.
Okay. Just a curiosity, did you already share the insight of your Futures Literary Labs with the today's Sierra Leone's policymakers? If yes, which their reaction were?
That's a good question. Do you want to take another one before we dive into that?
What did she say?
Yeah. And don't forget to give your name maybe. So that was Nicoletta.
Sure. My name is Jason. I'm from Zimbabwe. And my question is, if you were the minister, how would you go about using futures literacy to develop policy? So that's the first question. And the second question is, what was the process like of collecting data? How do you go about the sort of getting insights from the lab? What's the process? Thank you.
Okay.
Can you repeat the second part of your question?
How do we go about collecting data?
Just the process of, so you're in a lab and you're having these conversations. How do you record? Do you transcribe? Do you, how do you generate the insights and disseminate them?
Very cool.
I am Safa from Italy. I wanted to ask, since you spoke about generations and including different generations in the conversation, if you took into account the older ones and how their view of power and empowerment, their definition of power, and if this definition was taken into account. Thank you.
Taken into account by whom? The group of researchers or by the group of participants or? Okay.
I cannot vividly remember your question, but I'll come back to you. You were asking, sir, that if we were the ministers or Minister of Gender, what will we do
With the data that we got.
with the data that we've got? Well, in putting policies into paper, it takes several steps. So I think if I was the minister, I would first of all go through the documents that is being presented to me, have a discussion around it, and see how much I can factor it into the policies. And not only factor it into the policy, because like I said, there is a big disconnection between the policy itself and also policy implementation. This is something that we struggle with in our own community, in our own space. So if I were the minister, I think putting the policies into writing, factoring it into whatever that has been written, and try as much as I can for it to be implemented. That is what I would do. As for how we gather our data, we have participants in the room We do not have a high table or low table relationship. We are seated together. Whatever information that we gather, we transcribe it and we report it to, of course, the team from UNESCO and all.
I think that was a good one. I just want to speak now as a minister who want to use features data to do development work. One of the things they did was accepting features work in the country is good. Already we have a UNESCO chair, and in collaboration with Ministry of Gender, they've had the data, so it's to institutionalize features work. Now, we have a university where we work as administrators and researchers, University of Makeni. What they've done is to empower us. So it has to do with collaborative effort. You know, policy implementation comes with partnership, local and national and international. So it's all about partnership and ensuring during implementation you establish monitoring team to ensure the real thing goes on the ground and data that has been collected, shared and understood by everybody. To respond slightly to what we did in terms of gathering data, we used one method, most, if not all, would know Professor Kewele, who is a storyteller. We used to telling approach. People feel comfortable sharing their story, sharing what they feel, images they have. So that was how we gathered data through the stories they share. We had a translator who spoke the language, almost all of us, transcribed, and also take it to them. And recently, before we travel, they consented that reflect their mind. So we are speaking their mind, and to be shared. Thank you.
Sorry, could you please, sorry.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question.
Okay.
The question was basically to know how the minister reacted to some of the data that was presented. And maybe there's two pieces of information that we should share at this stage. One is the project got slightly delayed because there were elections, a series of different elections in Sierra Leone in June. So the presidential elections, legislative elections, and at the city level, so municipal elections at the same time, meaning that we actually got to meet with the new minister of the same political party as the previous one, but a different minister, who was actually supposed to come this week, and we had a delay. We wanted to meet before coming here, but that will happen actually slightly after. Now, we have been receiving some pretty good feedback in terms of like their desire to engage with the materials. How they will act upon it is, left to them, which allows to go back to the question in terms of what is the value add of futures literacy for policy making. Coming straight from this project, I think there's a variety of different things that we can do in terms of questioning the assumptions that exist or underlying existing policies. That is something that futures literacy processes allows us to do. In terms of ensuring that there's some forms of social dialogues, yes, we can use futures literacy methodologies to do that. Now, in terms of developing an entire policy, it will require other skills as well involved in the process. It's not just to say that futures are going to change the entire game of policy making. It could, I don't know. But for what we're doing, I think it has the ability to do the preparatory work that we need for this type of processes. Now, another element in terms of data collection, around the notion of trust and how data was collected, the advantage of having 10 different researchers coming from all at the University of Makeni, but coming from different places in Sierra Leone, is that basically we had a team with a very wide network of different types of women, like talking about people who are mayors, talking about people who are tailors, and so that enabled us to actually have a pretty wide range of data collection. We're not going to say that it was actually a fair representation of the sample of all the women in Sierra Leone, but it also allowed us to go into different places in terms of having diverse data. And for the work of questioning assumptions, that was sufficient in that prospect. I think there was a final question on the definition of power, but we're going to end it. Can we just finish at 1 so that we have this representation of 45 minutes of sessions? Can we finish at 1? So in 5 minutes, yeah. Sounds good. So do you want to have like a final point on the definition of power that was actually approached in this group? That allows you to maybe add your closing remark to that. So you can answer the question or add your closing remark in the same
Come again?
altogether.
Can you come again with the question?
Yeah. Do you want to like maybe react to the final question on how the definition of power came in as part of the group and maybe share your final thoughts on the project?
All right. The definition of power comes in diverse way. Power, what are people define power? Not looking at political power. People see power in terms of respect, value, and how their views can be reflected. And of course, power is also seen as how they cannot be stigmatized and have a free space, which the future leaders enable us to do. So my final sharing thought will be, one, I'm a youth-focused person because I believe young people matters. And it matters because women also matters about young people. So we promote the agenda of young people, we promote the agenda of women. Let us all form partnership to push the goal. We can translate what we have in Sierra Leone if we can all come together, and we are going to push the trend. Thank you. Future. We can use the future to shape our current realities. Future help us to have a better future. Thank you. I'm Ibrahim of Conteh.
Thanks for that. Ibrahim, you want to share like your final idea, just like 2 sentences that you wish to share with us? This way we can close it off.
Okay. Can I please just say something about the minister? It is true that we cannot assume what people are thinking, but having worked with the present minister, I can assure you that she, the Minister of Gender, is going to really welcome, because her entire career itself has been working with women in gender. So I think that is why the government saw it fit that she should be the minister. So that's what she has been doing her entire life. So I'm sure she will welcome it. And
We'll need to close, so.
okay, thank you. So we want to thank you. I told some people around that I was talking to that Sierra Leone is a virgin ground for whatever research that you want to do, especially with issues related to women in diversified areas. So should you have any interest, please don't hesitate. You have wealth of information that you are looking for in Sierra Leone. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Since one is closed, I have a quotation from Bell Hooks that I wanted to share with you. I will just share the beginning because I won't be able to share the rest so that we can stay on time. Rarely, if ever, or any of us healed in isolation. We have to beware of the extent to which liberal individualism has actually been an assault on community, when the genuine stuff of life is our interdependency, is our capacity to feel both with and for ourselves and other people. When you wake up and find yourself living someplace where there is nobody you love and trust, no community, it is time to leave town, to pack up and go. You can even go tonight. And where you need to go is any place where there are arms that can hold you, that will not let you go. From that perspective, Black Liturgies, that is actually quoting Bell Hooks, encourage us to inhale and say, I won't carry it alone, and to excel by saying, I am no burden. And so for a project that is actually starting from women's perspective to think about development, it was also important for us to actually see what forms of interdependencies exist within the community, get to find out that it's not about supporting just individual trajectories, but actually thinking about the linkages between different people. And one thing that came very strongly from the participants was to say, we don't want men out of the picture, but we feel like we recognize men's role and contribution in society, and we're not recognized for the role that we're playing. And so if we're to think about development in a wider place, in a wider world, thinking about the role of those different actors and how they're already contributing to the society that we're in is for us capital for the work that we actually got to find out. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And of course, do not hesitate to come to us. We had like plenty of other findings we wanted to share and we're not able to.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both.